believe everybody is returned, so this is the work session of the Pinehurst Village Council on Tuesday, April 13th, 2021 at 6:40 p.m. This work session is following the regular meeting of the Village Council, which ended at 6:30. We have several agenda items to hear about and discuss tonight, and this will be followed by a closed meeting of the Village Council after the work session. Having called the meeting to order, the first item of discussion is, are there other work session business issues that any council member wants to add? I have a couple that won't take long to discuss, I think, but a couple of ideas. But anybody else have issues you want to discuss that are not on the agenda at this point? Okay.
John.
Yes.
John, I'd like to bring.
Go ahead, Lydia. Yep.
I'd like to bring up something you and I discussed today.
Yes.
A group of Pinehurst residents wanted to speak with me about a couple of things. What was the resort doing with parking? And then they went to a USGA presentation and got the answer to that. And the second thing was they asked for a status on Wicket Lodge. Where does that stand in planning? So I told them I would ask in our meeting.
And on the latter point, though, Lydia, on the what status of the Wicked Lodge? They just meant where it is in the planning process? All right.
Yeah, I think they know it went to HPC, and I think there was a belief that it might be going back to HPC, so they weren't sure, and I wasn't sure. So they were just wondering where the Wicket Lodge stands in the planning process.
Okay, why don't we answer those questions right now? I think Jeff can probably do it, but I think Darren is with us as well, isn't he? So the question is, I guess really twofold. Go ahead, Darren, you're there. You heard the question. Go ahead.
Darren's here, and I will note that I do put that information in my weekly report to the council. So it is going to a public hearing. What is that, Alex? Next Wednesday, I believe.
I think it is, yeah. At the planning board.
Yep, on the 21st. Correct, next Wednesday.
Okay, now.
That's a planning public hearing?
That is correct.
Hang on, one at a time. Darren, did you?
Planning.
All right, so it's April
Yes.
21st at what
Correct.
time? What time?
4 o'clock.
4 p.m., April 21st. That'll be the official hearing of the Planning and Zoning Board of the Wicket Lodge
Correct.
proposal from the resort, correct?
Correct.
All right.
That is correct.
So that answers that.
Now, Darren, are they going back to HPC or are they finished with HPC? They had that question.
As of right now, they're not going back because they haven't completed their construction drawings or anything like that. So there's not a need to come back right now. There's an anticipated need that they'll have to go back because as the plans are more fully developed, changes will likely be made similar to what we've seen with Village Chapel, and they'll likely end up having to go back to the HPC for those modifications.
Okay. I think that should answer the questions that I was asked. Okay.
And for anybody that drives by the resort, there's a little green and white sign that says there's a public hearing.
And that's
right
the
up
public
there.
hearing for next week.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's been up for several days, a week.
Yeah, it's been up within the prescribed time period that we put those signs up for public hearings.
Okay. Well, I think the question was more for HPC, but I can go back with this information and this should answer the questions that were asked. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
First time that I've seen something not fully completed on HBC go to planning and zoning. Is that normal?
No, it got it, Kevin, it got it, they did get their COA, so they have an approved COA. But any changes that might happen because when their construction drawings and architectural drawings are actually made as they go through the planning process, any of those changes are going to have to go back to HPC before they actually get to the construction point, before we'll issue permits.
All those things they didn't have at HBC, don't they have to have them at planning and zoning?
Which things was that, Kevin?
They didn't have a lot of details and plans. Do they have to have?
No, they have to have the same level. They'll provide the same level from a conceptual plan standpoint. The requirements of our PDO is they just need to provide us with the elevations. The elevations that were submitted for HPC will be adequate for P&Z review. Correct, Alex?
That's right. And Kevin, from my recollection of the HPC meeting, there were some questions over some site features as well that was a little bit outside of the purview of the HPC, which will be covered with the material that's already been submitted to us with the general concept plan. There's like 5 or 6 pages of anything from existing conditions to the proposed site layout and the other facilities that are going to need to be improved, parking, circulation, and traffic areas there. So there'll be a lot more material going to Planning and Zoning Board next week.
To
Will
clarify
the
one
planning
other,
and zoning,
go ahead, Jane.
will the planning and zoning board receive dimensioned plans?
Dimension for the building,
Yes,
I'll look and
and,
see.
and
what
for
we-
the rest of it, actually, the site
yeah,
plan
we're-
itself.
I
Yeah,
believe
because
there's,
we have a general concept plan with all the dimensions on it.
it's correct.
Not on the elevations, I don't think. But-
Really? Why
Right?
not?
The elevations haven't been updated from what was sent to HPC for their review and approval.
Yeah,
Why wouldn't you have dimensions on the plans?
It's also scaled. It could be scaled on the concept plan if you need to scale it.
critical dimensions like height, building height, I mean, those have to be on the plan, but I mean, detailed dimensions of every aspect of the building here.
Because
I
they
don't
don't
think
have, it's,
I don't think our ordinance
I
requires.
don't think even,
Right.
I don't think even building height was on those plans. when
Building
they went
height-
to
Well, it
HPC.
didn't need to be on HPC because it's not an HPC question. Building
I
height is
believe,
not
we
a,
saw- I believe the
well, I
elevator,
guess it is, yeah.
I thought they showed because what they were showing was the massing of the roofs
Yeah.
between the clubhouse and the proposed.
Well, I had a very difficult time understanding it, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I mean, they had very detailed of how the actual elevation of the top of the building and the elevation of the both levels, if you want to look at it at both levels, the second level and then the very bottom level of the building. Also, with that being an evidentiary hearing, that was, stuff that was admitted into the record by the sworn testimony of the applicants.
We will give you all the material that we've gotten from the applicant, which is a considerable amount of material. We can also include things that were as part of the HPC packet as well. So we'll give you everything that we got as this progresses, and it hasn't gone before Planning and Zoning Board yet. So we don't know what additional questions might come up as part of that review at this point, because we haven't had the public hearing yet.
Right, right. Well, these are good updates, though, and we all want to keep track of that.
One more point of clarification,
Jeff?
just in case, folks in the viewing audience might have heard something here, but there's no requirement in our PDO that a case like this or a project like this go to the HPC first. It could go through the planning and zoning and council approval process first, and then go back to HPC for approval. There's a chicken and egg thing here that, pick your poison. No matter how you go through it, you run the risk of having to go back to the first through the first process again.
As the Village Chapel found out, because they
Yeah.
ran a similar schedule.
Does this say, though, Jeff and Darren, that, because I remember when this issue came up at the HPC hearing on Wicked Lodge back in February, does this mean, though, that we have maybe a little disconnect on procedure or timing that we should try to clarify, and where things are going to go and what has priority over another? I think there may be some questions, certainly in the public and with the council on that, but is there a way let's think about how we might clarify that process
With the
in the future.
participants or with the public? I guess I'm not. clear
Well,
what you're suggesting.
as you said, it's a chicken and egg. Maybe we can figure out which is going first, the chicken or the egg, and make this more clear in the future.
Oh, for for updates to our PDO and.
Yeah, yeah,
like, yeah.
yeah. Another one of those, update. Okay. Thanks for those questions, Lydia. Does anybody else have any other business they want to suggest, and we'll get that out of the way right away tonight? Okay. I have 2 points I want to make, and then a suggestion about the agenda items. With respect to the House and Senate bills on residential zoning, we have a letter, you've seen it, from the mayor of Foxfire. I believe other communities will be emulating that. And my proposal to the council is, unless you disagree, that I will ask Jeff and Mike Newman to draft an appropriate response from Pinehurst with respect to those residential zoning bills, and circulate that around to all the council, and then we'll get something agreed and mailed up to our delegation in Raleigh. Would that be an acceptable way to proceed on following up those bills? I'm just dealing with the residential zoning bill.
Sure.
Okay? All right. So Jeff will work on that a bit. Secondly, we have not on your written agenda, but I know in your minds, a presentation tonight on conditional zoning from Alex and Darren. And I think I would go down to agenda item number 5, which is the continued discussion on the tree, on the buffer ordinance. And I would suggest, unless someone has a particular problem with my idea, I would suggest that 3 of us on the council have not yet responded to Darren's, what'd you call it, Darren, the poll and the matrix. Jane and Judy have supplied some nice feedback to Darren on that. And I would suggest that the other three of us should do that, and we would defer discussion on the development ordinance, the buffer ordinance, until our next meeting. We wouldn't discuss it tonight because we have some other things we've added in, particularly the zoning training. Would that be acceptable to the council, that the rest of us other 3 council members will go through that poll that Darren has supplied, Jane and Judy have already done that, and get that information to him?
Yeah. And
Yes.
I've done it as well. I just
sent it to Darren.
Okay, we'll work on it then. Okay, good.
I didn't answer the last one because I wanted more information from Darren, so
Fine.
I can wait and get that later.
Yep.
Let's keep interfacing with Darren then on this, because we have some time to work on that, and I think this is a good way to proceed. So the 2 discussion items then on the agenda tonight would be the public comment procedures and the conditional zoning training. I think I have a couple of updates to the procedures, the public comment procedures. I think Judy offered some earlier today, so I'd like to deal with that first and then get to the training, if that would be okay. And I think if that's all right with the council. So we'll take the public comment procedures and then deal with the conditional zoning training immediately thereafter, and then go to the closed session.
I have some comments on that as well.
On the public procedures, public comment procedures. Okay. Jeff, are you with me on that so far? Jeff Sanborn?
Yep, I'm
Okay.
trying to pull up
The poll.
share my
Public
screen again
policy.
so I can pull up that document.
Judy, you circulated a thought or two this afternoon. I've made note of them on a copy of the procedures I've got in front of me. But would you like to discuss that a little bit further on what you intended on that with the yield or other issues?
Yeah, sure. So the second bullet point on the page that he's showing says, each person who signed up to speak is going to have 3 minutes. That's fine, to make their remarks. And they'll only be entitled to the time allotted to each speaker and 1 additional time period. Sorry.
That's okay.
And 1 additional time period, which may be yielded to him or her by another individual who also has signed up to speak on a particular topic. I mean, that seemed very convoluted to me. I mean, I recognize this happens at the, the Democratic and Republican conventions and all that kind of stuff, but I think this is just a village hall meeting. Why wouldn't we just stop it after
3 minutes.
3 minutes to make his or her remarks?
Judy, that's the count, that's in the county comment procedure.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we have to keep it. I'm definitely with Judy on this. In fact, I had an addition to this paragraph that will be a little different, but I think
I agree with Judy,
taking
too,
that
so-
out on yield would be okay with me. And maybe, Judy, you have a particular way you'd like this to read. You could send that to Kelly, and
Yeah, I mean,
we can work it
I
into a
think
marked copy.
think the highlighted copy that Jeff's suggesting be removed is where I would,
Mhm.
and just end it after remarks. I
Yeah.
mean, you're not trying to solve world hunger here with this policy.
All right.
So I think, the mayor at his or her discretion can make some decisions like that from the floor if you want to. But, and if you have an extraordinary circumstance like we did, with the sidewalk discussion a couple of winters ago, you may want to have a little bit more of a procedural, but, to the evening. But for just general comments of Mr. Precipio and our normal attendees who come and share with us, I think, stopping after his or her remarks is fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think, Judy, at least for me, and this applies to the rest of you as well, since we got back to the work session, I'm having a little trouble with the hearing everybody correctly. There seems to be more of an echo in the room. I'm looking at Jason to see if you could turn the volume down a little bit or something, and it might help me hear what you were saying. But I think the idea is to take this idea of yielding out altogether, and I can work with Kelly to mark
you
a
see
copy on that.
John, can you see the screen where Jeff has highlighted yellow copy?
I've got it now, yeah. Got it.
Okay, all right. So I'm
Okay.
just suggesting that end the sentence after remarks and remove that highlighted text.
Remarks, period.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me
Are other
read
comments?
that again. Just hang on. Okay, I would like to make a friendly amendment to that same bullet point, which would be worded roughly in the following way. At the mayor's discretion, the 30-minute total time limit and the 3-minute personal time limit may be extended. And the reason I'm suggesting that is it gives the mayor a little flexibility. If somebody needs 4 minutes, but it's a important topic and it's seen to be in the best interest of the public on the one hand and the council on the other to have a little more time. And if there happens to be a night when there's a number of comments and we're trying to allow as many people to speak as possible, it allows the mayor to extend the 30-minute total time limit by some degree. I can tell you that if I am the mayor and that situation happens, I'm going to be looking to my right and my left as to what you all would feel about that extension. So I don't see it just as something I would, do without trying to get some comments back from yourselves about yes or no. But so I would read that again. It's just that the mayor, at his discretion, would allow the 30-minute total time and the 3-minute personal time limit to be extended.
Yes.
I disagree with that, but I absolutely agree with the mayor having the discretion to extend the 30-minute time frame without looking left or right. Because the goal here is to get more people to talk instead of someone hijacking the meeting with a 45-minute speech. So I agree with the 30-minute extension. If we have a lot of people that want to talk, I'll stay there all night, for everybody to hear their 3 minutes. But I think everybody wants more time, and then you've just opened the door, and now we're in an endless situation. But I absolutely agree with the extension of 30 minutes. And I don't think you should have to look left or right to extend it 30 minutes. If we have enough people that want to make comments, more than 10 people using 3 minutes, we have 20 people, we stay there an hour at the mayor's discretion, So I agree with half of it, It's not this, I think everybody thinks that needs more than 3 minutes, and that's kind of the problem we're having right now.
But Kevin,
Okay.
why not give him full discretion? Because we'll have a sign-in sheet, and if we have 40 people on that list or whatever, John may decide or the mayor may decide at the very start that we can't allow that much. I like building the flexibility in on both of them.
I agree with Lydia.
And why do we have to address it? If you leave it out, isn't it at the mayor's discretion anyway?
Yes, that's what the other thing, that's what, I agree with that.
Wait, this says there will be 30 minutes and each person will have 3 minutes. So that's fixed. And so, you know, what John is proposing, which I agree with, is just give him the flexibility to extend either of those, depending on how many people are there or just whatever.
But do we have to memorialize it? Doesn't
Yeah,
he have that
Mhm.
flexibility anyway?
Agree with Judy.
Well, it says will in both.
Yeah, I still say the mayor has discretion.
And that's,
So-
he's
so-
just trying to put that in there.
I don't think it should be put in there.
So you don't add the extension sentence at all, just do it if I need to. Is that the idea?
That's one approach. I think another would be to just have a blanket provision in here that says that the mayor may waive any of these provisions.
That's another way of saying it.
I'm okay with that too.
I'm
I just,
not sure I like that. I mean,
yeah.
Judy, your
Yeah.
comment was?
She didn't like it.
Well, I mean, you know, you've got one, two, three,
There's too many.
you got 10 bullets here. Now you can, and so the mayor can say, well, we're going to dispense with this, or dispense with that. That doesn't feel good to me.
I don't want to put you in a tough position where you got to make all these decisions on the fly.
Well, I
But-
think that is what happens. You make this decision on the fly, you know. That is the reality.
Mhm.
It's based on the circumstance. 40 people sign up, you know, unless you say everybody has 30 seconds, you're not going to get to all of them. So you'll have to make a decision in the moment.
I made it clear that if the mayor sees fit to extend to 30 minutes because the quantity of the public that signed up, he should. So I think he should have that authority to extend it so we hear everyone, you know. That's what it's about. This isn't about us wanting to go home earlier. This is about us wanting to hear more from our citizens. And what you're going to do by extending the time is we're going to hear from less citizens. And I'm a little concerned about that. I want to hear from more. But so I agree with you having the 30-minute, the ability to extend the 30-minute. And I don't think you should have to look left and right to do it. I think it's your discretion as mayor. But just I don't think you should flirt with the 3 minutes right now.
Okay. I'm looking over at Kelly. She's getting this down, and we'll work together on that. Okay, fine.
I'm good with discretion on the 3 minutes.
Say again, please, Jane?
I'm good with discretion on the 3 minutes.
Is
Okay.
it the
And,
10 or the 30?
yeah, I am too.
I'm not, just a 30-minute extension.
Well, let's see what. the
All right, well, we'll see what we can come up with on that. The other friendly amendment here, or addition, change, and I think one or two of you mentioned this earlier, may have been Lydia, is bullet point 4, having to do with the public comments received by email. And I think there's a mixed view of this as to whether we need to be reading these, or certainly you would be all receiving them in totality, the next day. But there was some discussion, I think, at the last meeting about whether we should be reading these or just in summary. And I'm of a view that at this point that we would receive these comments, they would be circulated in full to all the council members, but we would not be reading the written comments at our meetings.
I agree with you. I had this highlighted, John. I wanted to, this was something we did because of COVID, extraordinary circumstances. It's not normal practice. Maybe if something like COVID happened again, we might, decide to do it again, but if they send us an email, I think they should be here to give their comments publicly, but they could send us an email anytime they want for us to read. So I had this highlighted. I thought we agreed that was just a COVID issue that we were doing. It isn't part of our normal policy.
Well,
You know,
I
Kevin,
think
this
we
is-
would have,
this
I
is
think
what I said.
we would accept comments by email in the future, no matter what circumstances, I think, so.
No, I agree. I'm saying reading them at the
Yeah.
meeting was a function of COVID.
Right.
I don't think it was a function of normal practice.
This was my point last time. I asked the question, who are these public comments for? And I think the answer was the public comments, the emailed ones are for us. And rather than have the clerk have to read every one of them or summarize them, just say the following people have submitted email public comments, and council will be receiving all of these. So at least acknowledge that we received their emails, and they will know that we will receive them and we will read them.
In the case of today, we received them prior to the meeting. They had an advantage over the meeting, which
Yeah,
is.
that was great. She sent them early. We didn't have that much time for a bunch of them, but
Kelly,
So that's what I was thinking.
Well, Kelly was really doing extra duty there, and I appreciate what she did, in fact, summarizing them very nicely. But the wording I would put in here in replacement of the wording that deals with the reading or the summarization of emails in public comments, I would just say that comments submitted by email will be circulated in their entirety to the council, to council members and appropriate staff.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
and not read their names, which is fine with me if we don't read their names.
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Okay. I think, maybe, Jeff, any comment from you, and maybe we'll discuss this with Mike on the issue of reading the emails or not, but any thoughts from you off the top of your head?
I recall our conversation last go around on this one. I like the idea of, as Lydia pointed out, the audience is the council. And if they come in written, it's okay for us to distribute them to the council in writing. We don't have to read them.
Okay, good. All right. I think we'll do is to mark up the policy in a kind of legal way with the changes marked out and the additions marked in, and get this around, and I'll work with Kelly later this week to get that around, with the idea then that at our next meeting, this would be coming up in the regular meeting for approval, but we'd have some time over the next 10 days to discuss that. But I would like to get it into effect if we're all in agreement on that. So any other thoughts then on public comment policy for tonight? Seeing none.
I sent something really long last night, and I don't have to go into it right now, but to Kevin's point, and I've thought a lot about it today, we're on our side. We know what our village matters. We deal with this. We're on our side of the fence. You've got people out there at home, and if they're willing to get in their car and come to Village Hall and express themselves, I'm happy with listening to anything they want to say. And I did tell you guys, I found some stuff that if they say stuff, and there's some even examples of how to handle comments that are not pleasant to hear, but, First Amendment principles seem to suggest allow for this kind of public comment. So, we've had some really unfortunate things happen lately, but I still think about the person at home. We want people to be involved, and I want to encourage people to listen. I want to encourage people to come to our meetings. I want to encourage people to use the 3 minutes they have to say whatever's on their mind. And I have a hard time limiting that. And you guys may not agree with me, but I guess I just feel really strongly about the First Amendment and the right to free speech. And I'm having a hard time curtailing that.
What are we limiting? I'm confused. What, are we limiting something?
Speakers shall only discuss matters that are pertinent to the legal authorities of the Village of Pinehurst. And some people, we know what our legal authorities are. People out there in the public don't. And imagine them, it's like, I've got to talk to a public official, and we're the closest ones to them. And so they come to Village Hall and they spill their guts for 3 minutes.
Suggest better wording then, Lydia?
I take it out. I would take that whole thing out.
Yeah.
That's what I'm having a hard time with. And again, I may not convince you guys of that, but I was thinking about the people at home who want to come express their opinion. And like I said, they could come talk to us about the Easter Bunny. That's extreme, but they may be upset about,
Well,
the borders, I don't know, and they want to express themselves to public officials, to elected officials.
I don't agree with that example, but I'll tell you a real world example. They'll come to complain to us about a highway that isn't under our control, because they don't know it's not under our control. So I see where you're coming from.
Well, and that you just said differently what I was trying to say. We know what our legal authorities are. They don't. And, maybe at the end, thank you so much for your comment. This is under the jurisdiction of DOT. Would you like for us to, submit your comment to DOT or whatever? But I just am having a hard time telling the person who is leaving their home and coming to Village Hall.
Honey, how do I get other one off?
How do what?
Who's speaking?
I said, Mike.
I'm in the meeting, but I
Yeah.
can't get the other link that I was on the public thing.
We can hear you, Mike.
Take it off.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I thought that was Mike Newman, yeah.
It was.
Oh, but he's not commenting on this, okay.
He just muted himself.
Yeah, good, good. Well,
I think, since we're talking about Mike here, I think Mike is, subject to whatever he might wish to say tonight, pretty comfortable that the way the policy reads is the way it should read. It's the way that we control it's the way we participate and the way we allow the public to present information to the village council for our benefit and theirs. So I'm certainly not trying to, moderate or change that. But I think Mike is pretty comfortable with what we've got.
It's almost
Right.
like, go ahead, Jeff.
I sympathize to agree with the point Lydia is making. I understand it. The flip side of it is these situations where you have 40 people that want to line up on both sides of an issue and village government has no say in, and they want to come and vent their frustration in a council meeting. And the purpose of a council meeting is to conduct village business. And when that happens, it blows it all up. I mean, you get to the point where you all have lost focus and lost attention. We might have important things to talk about later down on the agenda or in the work session, but we're wore out because 40 people came in and blew the thing up. And I think
But Jeff,
that's what we're trying to get at.
I'm not saying the important part. Us getting worn out is okay. I mean, we're elected officials.
It makes us all less efficient. The purpose of the meeting is to conduct village business. I'm sorry, Kevin, I cut you off.
No, I cut you off. I didn't mean to. I was trying to support what you're saying in a different
Yeah.
way. It's not an abuse of us, it's abuse of the public's time. This is the public's time to deal with public issues. And I feel like it dissuades people from coming to make comments. I think the more structure we have, the more comfortable people will be willing to come, knowing that they'll be able to get there in a reasonable amount of time, be able to say their point and leave. And I want more input, not less. So I'm really concerned about what you're saying, Lydia, that we're restricting speech. I feel like we're expanding speech. More people are going to be able to talk. I mean, I feel like we're expanding speech. I hear the problematic language that you're talking about, but I feel like more people will speak now.
Well, and to Jeff's point, I mean, I haven't been doing this that long, but how many times do we have that many people show up that want to talk?
Oh, lots. On any
Really?
constitutional issue, lots of people.
Yeah, I still, like I said, you guys, I'm struggling with this. I feel like if they come, they want to come and complain about traffic on 211, are we supposed to say, sorry, we can't hear you on that one? I mean, that's a valid public concern.
Make a judgment call on that, and I think.
I think, well, I'm not, they are a judgment call, and that's, the whole subject matter here is, Ray, what is within the purview of the village council? I mean, you are elected officials and representatives of the village of Pinehurst.
Well,
You know,
and I
so-
found,
You
know, I
have the ability to represent Pinehurst on matters, like to the DOT,
Yeah,
right? So,
I think that would be, if they want to complain about 211,
Yeah.
I hear it,
I'm sorry, Kevin, you broke up. What'd you say?
I'd want to hear it, even though we have some indirect influence. I would still want to hear from the public. I think what we're trying to stop from happening, people using our stage, misusing our stage, not people using it properly. And I don't know how you put that on paper, but we're not trying to limit speech. I frankly think that this will expand. More people will come and talk if they know that, you're able to come in and get out and say your piece. So I hope we're expanding speech. So,
Well, and I think this is in here because of the unfortunate things that have happened over the past month or two. So set those aside because I hope they're unusual. So then what have you guys been left with that you feel like we need to limit what they have to say?
well, I don't think we're limiting what they have to say. They're allowed to criticize us on anything.
211, Highway 211?
But yeah, I think that's we have an indirect, I would let the mayor decide, number one. I mean, he's the person that runs the meeting.
Yeah.
If I was mayor, I would say we have an indirect impact on talking to the state on 211. So I'd like to listen. But I'm talking about things that we have not even an indirect impact.
Yeah.
But see, we know that, and I was thinking about the person who comes in, like I said, they've left their home, they want to talk to, and maybe the example I used was a bad one, but they don't know what our legal authorities are, and they come in and they want to say whatever they want to say to an elected official. And I'm thinking it's okay if this happened every single meeting and we had to spend 50 minutes on it, I'd go, boy, let's do something here. Let's change this. I just don't know how much it happens. And I'm saying if they go to the trouble of doing this.
Well, I guess, Lydia, I would
Then
answer
I-
it saying that, again, the mayor's going to have, and the council are going to have some discretion on this. And, if it's a transportation issue, I think that's something the village does have an interest in, just taking that one idea. There's going to be some flexibility here, but I think we do need to have a policy that states where our interests are and to protect the public's time and to protect the council's time so that we're most effective doing the things we were elected to do. And that doesn't take away from the First Amendment, and certainly that's the last thing in my mind, and I'm sure yours, all of the councils too, to be taking that right away. But we have to deal with things that we can deal with, and we have to watch that we don't get overridden by issues and discussions that we can't control, especially if it's redundant. Now, there may be going to be times when somebody comes, they start to speak, it's on a subject, they keep it to 3 minutes, but it's on a subject that we can't deal with. Okay, they've had their say, but we don't need to hear that again in the following 6 weeks every time we meet. So that would be when I would do that. Judy?
I mean, the school redistricting was a big issue. And, mothers came, dads came to our meeting and expressed their views. Nancy made it very clear that this was none of our business and we weren't going to deal with this. And she was very curt and, with them and shut it down. Now, if we had had a policy that said, we don't deal with things that aren't part of our purview, that might sit a little better with those mothers. They were really incensed.
Right.
That we were just turning a deaf ear to their plight. And that's, I think if we don't stay in our own lane, we aren't going to go anywhere. So we'll just be all over the place. So we've got to really stay in our own lane and deal with the things that are relevant to our job and our work. And over time, we'll have to educate people as to what that is. The speed limit on 211 is too high in some places. We can't affect a change in the speed limit.
Did Mike Newman have a comment on this? And I'm only asking because I know you were on the line a minute ago, Mike. You may not, but go ahead if you do.
You want me to do this in open session or you want me to do it in closed?
We'll deal
Yeah,
with
that's a good point.
We'll deal with it later.
Yeah.
Okay. We're allowed to do that. All right. Let's mark up this version. We'll get it around.
Kevin,
let's
did
see,
you
let's
have
see how we
another
work on
comment?
this.
Now,
Okay,
my comment was that we still listen to those,
right.
those went, people on redistricting, didn't we?
No,
Yeah.
I mean, after
I
about the
thought-
second person, she shut them down.
I
Well, I
thought we
think-
did. And just so you know, I commented to the Moore County on it. So, I mean,
Right.
you know, I went ahead and made sure that the county knew what I heard. And so I don't know if they wasted their time talking to us, even though we have no control. But we let them talk some. She did shut them down, like, because it was repetitive. But I honestly took action and talked to the county leaders I knew. So, I mean, I don't know if that is off the table, talking about that, you know, I mean, so I guess I have an expansive view of what's in our peer view. Things we have influence over, even if it's 10%, might be in our peer view. But
I agree.
But it didn't change the redistricting.
it didn't, but
Well, you didn't, but you satisfied the public's need or their
No.
desire that they feel like they need to vent to a government official about something that the government official is doing that is impacting their life.
They can write the letter to the editor.
yeah.
Okay, okay. All right, let's work with some of these changes. I hear what people are saying, and let's see if we can get this resolved and vote on something that's effective and appropriate at our next meeting. I'd like to move on then to the presentation on our training for conditional zoning. And Darren and Alex have come back to the office, I think, on that.
I'll take the lead on that. Jeff, if you could stop your share and I'll get ready to begin mine. Thank you. All right. Everyone see that all right?
Yep.
All right, so you guys saw my email yesterday, and some of you are familiar with what I was able to provide to the Planning and Zoning Board last week. The online module from the UNC School of Government is really helpful. It's, it's a little bit more of a higher level. It kind of gives a basis of what conditional zoning and some other terminology that is pretty well antiquated now, even though that module is only about 5 years old. But what I hope to do today is maybe build on that a little bit and tell you a little bit more about how we're going to apply it with our current requirements in our PDO and sort of what our parameters are. And again, that's just kind of what's based on currently in our development ordinance. Obviously, hopefully, the intended outcome here is you guys can learn how to apply this. As we know, we're going to have at least 2 conditional zoning requests coming before us. But I will kind of provide a little bit more of a broader background on it as well. But I'll obviously welcome questions and some back and forth at the end. So you see here, conditional zoning. Again, I'm going to try to touch on what is it, why use it, what conditions with conditional zoning are appropriate, what is a site-specific plan, and why should you require one with the submittal, what type of process does it follow, what type of decision is it, who reviews and acts on these, and of course, what are our current process and procedures for these, and what is allowed to happen or change after a conditional zoning is approved. So what is conditional zoning? Conditional zoning is a legislative process in which an applicant property owner may propose, and the local government can consider, a zoning map amendment that includes additional zoning conditions. So this is very different from just conventional zoning map amendments, which don't include any specific standards or specific zoning conditions. And it's really just based on the development regulations in place of that base zoning standard then in your ordinance. So your case law has always been upheld through many years that if you're proposing a conventional rezoning and you're the governing board, you have to consider all allowed opportunities and uses in the development ordinance at that time. in considering that potential map amendment. Conditional zoning, it does allow the local government and the applicant to kind of mutually agree to additional conditions that may be appropriate to a site-specific project that's proposed. Of course, all within the context of legislative rezoning and the appropriate statutes. So our updated 160D definition defines conditional zoning simply as a legislative zoning map amendment with site-specific conditions incorporated into that map amendment. So a little bit of background on really the three basic types of land development or zoning decisions. You have administrative, quasi-judicial, and legislative. Administrative is the most common. It hadn't been previously defined by statutes. It is now with 160D, and part of that is too because there are updated conflicts of standards that are now based across all three zoning or land use decisions, administrative, quasi-judicial, and legislative, where previously it had really been related to legislative and the very specifics to quasi-judicial. Administrative decisions, as it's kind of implied, are typically made by staff, usually do not require a public hearing, as we have learned recently with a couple of reviews that our current process for major subdivisions do require a public hearing, even though they are administrative decisions. These decisions, you typically determine facts on the application and the objective standards in the zoning ordinance at the time. Examples of these are just day-to-day zoning permits, interpretations of the ordinance, notice of violations that are sent, and basic site plans. And with an administrative decision, that decision is final and made and then can be appealed to the local board of adjustment. Quasi-judicial, I think we're kind of very familiar with this process, even though you guys haven't acted on it very much. Quasi-judicial means it requires discretion by that decision maker on whether it meets sort of general and subjective standards. So again, not a clear objective standards. And because of that, it does require an evidentiary hearing where you have to gather that competent material and substantial related evidence. You don't consider opinion and really doesn't offer up maximum public involvement just to get those who potentially could be aggrieved to whatever the outcome of the decision is and have standing. The decision is based on findings of fact and should be based on the evidence and testimony given. Examples of these type of decisions are like variances, appeals of administrative decisions, and COAs, or certificate of appropriateness. It could also be for subdivisions and some site plan approvals if the regulations in place at the current zoning ordinance require a discretionary decision to be made. So you have subjective standards in place. That could be like for a special use permit. Also, again, some subdivision plat approvals do require that. The Board of Adjustment with Chapter 160D does allow the opportunity for appeals of the Historic Preservation Commissions to go before the Board of Adjustment, the local Board of Adjustment, if you say specifically in your ordinance. Currently, ours does, but you can change that now and allow it go straight to the County Superior Court. Quasi-judicial decisions are final at the time, but can be, again, be appealed to Superior Court. All right, so legislative, this is what type of decision conditional zoning is, or really any time that you adopt, amend, repeal an ordinance or a map. So text amendments to our PDO, base conventional rezonings and conditional rezonings are all legislative decisions. So a legislative public hearing is required with these. And unlike quasi-judicial public hearings, these type of hearings is where you want to seek broad public input and comment and opinion on the proposed change. The Planning and Zoning Board must function as an advisory board to the governing board, and of course ours does to Village Council, and are not the binding decision maker. They just basically submit a recommendation to the governing board. The governing board, when considering these type of legislative decisions, shall consider its adopted comprehensive plan when making a decision on such amendments to the ordinance or map. I'll get a little bit more about what type of statements must be made or should be made on consistency or not consistent with the comprehensive plan. But basically, if on the record you can tell that the governing board cracked open their comprehensive plan and looked at something and making their decision, they're pretty solid. The decision can be appealed after the governing board makes their conclusion on a legislative decision, including the validity and constitutionality of the development regulations authorized by the statutes in 160D, at 108C, and of course in 405. And of course, they could be brought forth for the from declaratory judgment. Typically, the decision of whether or not, or the conclusion if the proposal is or is not consistent with the comprehensive plan, isn't up for judicial review. Really, all you're looking at for any type of appeal of these legislative decisions are, were the conditions correct? Did the governing board impose the correct type of conditions based on what was proposed? And did they actually crack and look open their comprehensive plan, and that they didn't obviously violate any other type of constitutional rights? All right, so let's talk about why would you want to use conditional zoning as a tool? So it does follow a more familiar and maybe less clunky or formal process. You get to do the legislative process, in which most folks do. The governing board is afforded wide latitude really in making their decision. You don't have any concern over ex parte communication, having a prior fixed opinion on the project. You don't have to subpoena or receive expert testimony, and don't have to worry about establishing standing when folks want to come and comment. Also, unlike some local jurisdictions have added requirements for like special use permits, and of course for a variance, you need a super majority. You need a 4/5 vote. So with legislative decisions like these, a simple majority is just needed for final action. Conditional zoning also could provide for more authority or latitude to the governing board on making these decisions that they feel are best for the community. And it does not limit the ability for the members of the governing board to gain input from stakeholders, other folks in the neighborhood. And you can negotiate directly with the applicant. It's very much like a negotiation process whenever you're going through these public hearings and reviews, and you're really trying to determine, what is the best balance. Also, very importantly, conditional zoning allows for you to be able to customize a type of proposed development based on several items that you can consider, like site constraints, site conditions, locations, adjacent properties, and of course the community desire and will. So I've included a little bit of comic relief in a couple of these slides because, gosh, we need it sometimes. But you see here, conditional zoning allows the governing board to balance a proposal that's before them with the community desire and their adopted land use plans. There on your left, you're trying to figure out, you've got both sides pushing in there on the two residents there, what's appropriate, what's not. And in the little cartoon there on the right, according to the zoning ordinance here, there's plenty of big for both of us. So yeah, there's room for all of us here in our jurisdiction. And a lot of times I understand in your positions, it could be you have a difficult role in trying to determine what that balance is and strike it. But that's why we have those public hearings, and conditional zoning allows for some wiggle room. All right, so our conditions with conditional zoning. So petitioners for a conditional zoning request can request conditions that are either more restrictive or less restrictive than the existing development standards. For reference, you can see section 6.2.4 of the PDO. Really, the initial intent of conditional zoning was to self-impose more restrictive conditions, but as it evolved through the state, it started to allow that and be held up in case law that local ordinance can specify what development standards someone could seek to either impose more restrictive conditions on themselves or be less restrictive. Very importantly here is that all those conditions shall be limited to those that address conformance with the development and the use of the site to what is in place within the local government ordinance, or impacts that are reasonably expected to be generated by that development or use of the site with the proposal. One big item is a use that is not currently allowed within that corresponding general use district that they're seeking a conditional district approval of cannot be conditioned to be allowed. You're creating a use variance, so that is definitely not allowed. You can allow conditions, however, to restrict allowed uses that are in that corresponding general use district. So you can limit yourself as an applicant proposing conditional district, and local government can consider those as well. I believe most notably and recently with the Village Chapel, some of those uses that are allowed in that PC district were proposed to be stricken to be allowed and was ultimately adopted with the ordinance. Another biggie here is all conditions must be mutually agreed upon by both the local government and the applicant. Now with some updates in 160D, it further states that the applicant must consent to these conditions in writing. Of course, that could be a little problematic. Luckily, we obviously now are live streaming, but we also have a recorded video. But one thing we may consider is allowing the applicant the opportunity to sign on the ordinance whenever it's adopted, which we know is signed by the mayor, the village attorney, and the clerk, but have an opportunity for the applicant to sign them based on the conditions that were agreed upon at the public hearing. So now we talk a little bit more about site-specific plan. We are like most jurisdictions in the state now that if a conditional district rezoning is proposed, we require what we call a general concept plan, which would meet the definition of a site-specific plan. And so this talks a little bit more about what that is and why. So you can require one, of course, that's been upheld and is clearly stated in the statutes now. This obviously is a tool. It gives the local government the opportunity. It gives staff, it gives our planning and zoning board, it gets the village council as well as the public an opportunity to better evaluate the proposal. You don't have to really consider what else could happen here, what else would they propose, or they say this, but I bet they're really going to try and develop something else. They're trying to sneak something in on us. The site-specific plan usually does, and of course with us it will, be part of the agreed upon condition of approval, and itself will be a zoning condition. And it provides a greater certainty to everyone about what's been approved and what you can expect to happen there on that site. It also demonstrates that the applicant or property owner has actually worked through, they've thought through this, they've looked at the site, they've had someone, usually most times, they've consulted with some professionals to develop this plan, and they've made an investment into it. So they're serious. They're not just around sort of kicking tires and see what shakes out. General concept plan, again, is required for our jurisdiction. And you can reference 6.2.1 of the PDO for that, as well as Appendix C for our requirements. So a little bit more about our process now. So again, Section 6.2 is pretty much the controlling area of our PDO that sets forth the provisions of conditional districts. For any base map amendment or text amendment that we would currently follow, and like we have been doing with the council with a couple of other base rezonings and current review of a text change that we're proposing right now. So initially the application, whichever we have on file at the time, and supplemental material is submitted to the staff, and staff takes our initial review. Next process is Planning and Zoning Board conducts their public hearing to review the request, hear public input on that, and then they will forward a recommendation to Village Council. All meanwhile, also providing a statement, their statement of plan consistency with the comprehensive plan. Then Village Council gets their turn at a public hearing, and then of course, final decision. So submittal requirements, of course, up front, we take the application and the fee in place, the fee schedule at the time. Also, if the request includes a change of intensity of uses, we require the applicant to go ahead and conduct their own neighborhood meeting. Go ahead and get it out there in the neighborhood and talk about what they're proposing to try to start sussing out any public issues that may arise of this. Again, we had some little brief discussion and question at the beginning of the work session on that about another upcoming submittal we know. It was confirmed that what has happened recently is the USDA conditional district rezoning application neighborhood meeting was conducted. So that's what folks were invited to come to. And typically the immediate adjacent property owners are notified for the neighborhood meeting. The applicant will double check with us on their mailing list that they invited those folks, and so we can concur that that meets the requirement. So the summary would typically include a list of who was notified, a sign-in sheet of who came up, and discussion on the proposal with everyone that determined to show up there at the neighborhood meeting. In the PDO, it does state that no member of the Planning and Zoning Board or Village Council may participate in a neighborhood meeting in their official capacity. A general concept plan with all the applicable requirements of Appendix C in the PDO are required with the submission. There is an opportunity for the village planner to waive some of the requirements of Appendix C, but sometimes it's rare. Sometimes I know one instance in where I've done it most recently in the past couple of years was for renderings for single family development, just to not potentially run afoul of our statutory obligation for design elements of single family structures. And any other relevant plans, drawings, renderings, elevations, or maps or documents related to development of proposed conditions or that staff seeks and asks for. Standards for conditional district. An applicant can place additional requirements or standards on this proposal. Again, these items are unique to our current development ordinance. An applicant may restrict certain uses allowed in a corresponding general use. And an applicant may request variations from the development standards as indicated in the table on section 6.24, subsection B of the PDO, which is here on this next slide. And I'll provide the council and Kelly as well a copy of the PDF of this so you guys can have on file so you can use to reference at any time. Of course, here we go with the number of or types of permitted uses. You cannot add anything that's not already allowed in that corresponding use. We've covered that. However, we do allow for uses that are not currently defined or contemplated in the PDO to be allowed to be conditioned. The only time I can recollect this happened was with the Gulf Pride conditional district rezoning. We still don't, and of course we didn't then have an opportunity for sort of like a research and development and R&D type center, which is a bulk of what that size of that facility was to be for. So they took the conditional district zoning route for that, and of course got approved and have been well established now for some time. We have some zoning requirements that go along with specific, we call them special requirements, such as accessory structures located inside a rear yard. They can be varied. Most recently that happened with the First Health Cancer Center and parking garage. Our open space standards for our townhouse development as well as open space subdivisions may not be reduced. Parking, you pay close attention to this, parking regulations can be varied. Landscaping requirements, you have no modifications permitted. I believe Kevin and Judy both were on council at the time when an example of this were when Community Presbyterian Church proposed a different type of use of buffer or stock than what was originally approved with their conditional district application back in 2017, I believe. Signs, you can vary the signage regulation. However, you are capped to only go up by no more than 50% of increase in signage area. I would pay close attention to that condition or that allowable condition as well. Lighting, you can seek to modify those. Cannot modify water and sewer requirements. Can modify fencing requirements. Design standards for single family dwellings. Again, that's just some cleanup items we haven't caught up with recent legislation. Site plan development standards can be modified. Another example of this would be the sidewalk requirement for Village Chapel very recently last year. And then some subdivision standards. So if there is a proposal for a conditional district rezoning with the general concept plan that's also going to have a subdivision of land. One example of this recently was the Winston Pines rezoning. You can vary some subdivision standards, but again, not the open space. So internally, sort of this is what's happening a lot behind the scenes whenever we're getting the application in, and it's a lot that happens before it really goes to these public hearings. We take an initial review with the application material and communicate anything we need with the applicant. A lot of times applicants now are taking advantage of a pre-application meeting. So typically for something as large scale as a conditional district rezoning, there is a lot of communication happening with staff before an application is made. The general concept plan is forwarded on to the staff technical review committee for review of items that are required with Appendix C, of course, as they relate to their respective disciplines, building code, fire code, utilities, engineering, traffic, etc. Once we determine compliance at staff level on the conceptual stage, again, because they're not at full construction drawing phase now, this is just at a conceptual phase, we're ready to schedule the public hearings and get ready and get set for the first review of the Planning and Zoning Board. So the Planning and Zoning Board review, we scheduled the proposal on the next available meeting date that we can manage. We do have to, because of legislative hearing, we have required notices. We have to place an ad in local paper, which has got to run 2 consecutive weeks, but not in the same week, within a 10 to 25 day window prior to the scheduled hearing date. That notice has got to include general information on the request, how to obtain more information if you wish. And of course, now, as we've been operating under remote meetings, where and how the meeting will be conducted and how they have an opportunity to comment. Mailed notices are also given out to all adjacent property owners, and these are immediate adjacent property owners and those that are located across rights of way. Again, the notice is in that same 10 to 25 day window and has the same general information. The week before the meeting, the agenda packet material along with the staff report and staff recommendation and the applicant material is forwarded on to the Planning and Zoning Board for their review. Planning and Zoning Board conducts the hearing. They receive the comment on the proposal from the applicant and the public. And then after the hearing, they can make a recommendation on the proposal to Village Council and adopt that statement of consistency with the current comprehensive plan. From there, it heads to council. We're looking at, the next staff will be looking at the next available meeting date that we can meet the notice requirement, and based on information we know that is headed to Village Council. We've got a lot of the discussion earlier today. The regular meeting was on the budget hearing that's expected to come. We might not want to schedule some lengthy conditional district hearings and a budget hearing all in the same meeting if we can. Luckily, council does meet twice a month mostly, so we have the opportunity to get on there in another couple weeks. But we have the same notice requirements. I won't go through that all again, but this is really just building. You guys can see the timeline, how extensive and very specific it is that we have to get things aligned in order to get before the public hearings. You guys get your agenda packet material like you always do prior to the meeting. All our material is forwarded on along with the applicants. And then you conduct your public hearing, you take comments from the applicant on the proposal. And of course, you're at negotiation table. You can start discussing some conditions or added conditions based on what was already requested. So the Village Council review and action, a little more specific on that. Based on the comment from the applicant that you've received, along of course with the packet material that's already been provided to you, and feedback you get from the public, additional conditions can be considered. However, after the notice of the public hearing, no changes can be made to the application or conditions which are less restrictive than those that were originally proposed. So after it gets noticed for hearing for you guys, nothing less restrictive, and this is unique to our ordinance, no other conditions that are less restrictive can be proposed. More restrictive conditions, of course, can. As I stated earlier, other conditions must be mutually agreed upon and consent given in writing by the applicant. And again, as I mentioned, hopefully we can work on achieving this by maybe having the applicant sign on the corresponding ordinance once adopted. After the public hearing, council, you shall consider the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Board, the report and recommendation by staff, and of course, the comments made during the public hearing. You can choose to adopt the proposal by ordinance, you can reject the proposal, or you can refer it back to further consideration. Of course, it's not stated, but it's understood if need be to gain further input or to address other items, you can consider to continue the public hearing to gain that extra information. In adopting or denying any such application for a conditional zoning map amendment, council shall also adopt a statement of consistency with the comprehensive plan and a statement of reasonableness. Usually staff will do our best to really prepare this for you guys and have them ready for you and give you a couple options in how you can look at adopting those statements. Appeal on decisions of village council on these amendments can be made by any aggrieved party to the Superior Court within 30 days after council's made that decision. All right, so let's talk about modifications to an approval. So an applicant receives an approval of their conditional district rezoning and their general concept plan. So now they can start proceeding with the process to obtain all the other subsequent approvals. And there's a lot. There's even more that happens after a general concept plan is approved. We are still not out of the ground with permits being issued for Village Chapel, and we're coming up on a year since they were really getting the hearing process. Things happen, things change, things get adjusted. So what happens when that? So a challenge with conditional zonings has always been revisions, things that need to happen. There are changes that have to happen based on site conditions or building conditions, who knows? And it stands to reason that there maybe should be modifications that are going to have to be developed and be approved, even very minor changes. Should they have to go through the entire review process that they went through, potentially becoming a time-consuming process for everybody? Are there some opportunities for some of these very minor changes that can be made and handled administratively by staff? Well, you see here, the comic relief is available. You're welcome to the planning department. This is especially true of today's planning department here. I can tell you that for sure. So you have a tough time sort of navigating through the approval process. How do I do this? So short answer is yes, there are opportunities for administrative modifications to approval. Now, we have historically had this in our ordinance where staff can approve very minor modifications, but now most recently, Chapter 160D, Section 703 now clearly allows for this. And it does state that the zoning regulation can provide that defined, you have to say what minor modifications to conditional district standards, as long as you're not changing or proposing any change in uses or the overall density of the development is not being increased, staff can modify that. They can allow for those changes. So now I'll refer you to section 6.2.3, subsection B, the PDO. It says that substantial changes must go through the same approval process, meaning back through planning and zoning board, back through village council for review and consideration. Other minor changes can be approved by staff. So one item that we do have in our toolbox, those change is deemed by us to really alter the concept of what was approved. We can elevate that request for consideration of council, of course, after a review and recommendation by the planning and zoning board. So again, following that same process. So here's a list right from the PDO of those substantial changes, meaning they must go back through the process for review. So if you're proposing any land to be added or removed from that conditional district, you got to go back through. That seems to be pretty common sense. If you're proposing any change of special performance criteria, design standards, or other requirements not specified in the PDO, a change in land use or development type beyond by what's permitted. So that's pretty well in line with the state statute. No change in uses. If you introduce a new vehicular access point to an existing street, road, or thoroughfare that wasn't previously designated for access, so you can kind of understand why that would be a substantial change. If you're increasing the total number of dwelling units originally authorized by the approved general concept plan, again, this is right in line with Chapter 160D. So there's a lot of changes that 160D made that luckily we're not going to have to turn and adjust like a lot of other jurisdictions have. If you're proposing to increase the commercial floor area more than 10%, you got to go back through the full approval process. If the total height of the structure is increased or proposed to increase by more than 10%, you've got to go back through. And again, just like we learned with Community Presbyterian Church, if the perimeter buffers or perimeter landscape areas are modified in any way other than a like for stock, you've got to go back through. If open space is proposed to decrease or if impervious area is increased. And finally, if the proposed change is deemed to have a discernible impact on neighboring properties, the general public, or those intended to occupy or sue the proposed development. I'm not sure the genesis of that language in there. It's fairly subjective, but hopefully we won't have to come to that route. So with that, again, it's fairly brief, a little bit more into what you guys were able to see if you were able to view the UNC School of Government module. But it talks a little bit more, hopefully I was able to answer a little bit more on our process and really what you guys are charged with looking at and reviewing. So with that, I'll turn it over back to you, Mayor, if you want to, we want to have some discussion on any of the slides.
Good. Alex, you're going to send this set of slides around to us, right? I think you said that earlier.
Yep, I'll be glad to do that.
Yeah, okay, because I took the test from the School of Government, but this wasn't in that package, as far as I recall.
How did everyone do on those questions, by the way?
All right,
I got it.
Jane got an A.
obviously this,
That's right.
obviously this is, very simple, so I'm sure there's no questions. Haha. All right,
How long do we have to decide?
yeah, let's get into
Well-
that. What about continuing, details, all that sort of thing? How does that work?
So continuing is really, you just got to be really specific on when you're continuing that hearing. So folks who were notified or wanted to come to that hearing still have an opportunity to know when they can come and hear that extra material. Now, you're probably thinking of the major subdivision reviews we've done where the PDO specifies you've got a 90-day window that you need to act on that. There really isn't one. There's obviously, an opportunity to accommodate reasonableness here. What is that? I don't think anyone really knows. I don't know if there's any case law on that. If it's been 365 days, it's been a full calendar year since you've taken action on one. Maybe you're not acting appropriately there. The only requirement or timing that I'm aware of is statutorily, the governing board can take up an action on a map or text amendment if the advisory board, the planning board, has not given their recommendation within 30 days. So it doesn't state that the advisory board, the planning board must give their recommendation within 30 days, but it does say that the governing board can decide to take that action. As you may understand, the planning boards may require additional public hearings and need additional information when they're reviewing these type of proposals as well. So I'm not aware of any clock that you're on after you guys get noticed and start holding these public hearings for these map amendments.
Thank you.
Alex, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You just said major subdivision, and I followed everything that you were saying that we need to do with conditional rezoning. Do all of those steps also apply to a review of a major subdivision?
Right now, currently, yes, because our major subdivisions, like major site plans, our PDO, it's a unique characteristic to our PDO. Our local ordinance says that we hold a public hearing in accordance with the sections there that are outlined in Section 6. So yes, we follow that same notification process that we do for the for map amendments that we currently do for major subdivisions.
Okay, because there was something in there that caught my eye, and I wrote it down, maybe not the whole thing. It said impacts reasonably expected to be generated by the development of the site. So an impact reasonably expected to be generated, would that include traffic?
It definitely could, especially now that language that you saw with that slide is specific to conditional district rezoning. So conditions on zoning approvals for those type of amendments. And that language was direct, I took that directly from the chapter 160D. So yes, you could certainly, make a decision that, this proposed use is going to generate XYZ amount of trips. Therefore, if a traffic impact analysis is required, there's other off-site improvements that may be required that are generally related to what that proposed use cost if you were to approve it.
Okay, so staff and council have the ability to look at the traffic that would be generated in connection with the development of a major subdivision.
If it's part of the zoning map amendment.
Say that again, Alex, and what do you mean by that? If it's part of the
Yes.
map?
If it's following the conditional zoning process. So
Yeah.
some subdivisions may be required and have to follow a conditional zoning process, but not all do. If it's a use by right, if you're like our other administrative major subdivision reviews we've done recently, you can't impose extra conditions that aren't already to have to be met by any other general applicant.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking if a rezoning is not required, but what is a major subdivision? It's a small number, right? What constitutes a major
I
subdivision?
think it's pretty much greater than 3 lots or no dedication of right-of-ways involved.
Okay, so that's pretty small. So if it's a major subdivision, I'm still trying to get my head around assessing the traffic impacts of that and the authority or the ability of staff or council. How does traffic fit into that in assessing the additional traffic that's going to be generated by something like that?
You're pretty well hamstrung by what you have in your development ordinance at the time. So it's got to be specifically, again, we're talking about our current process for major subdivisions, which if we've learned anything, I think I think that's something we probably should look at, probably sooner than later within the PDO of maybe updating the process, what process it should fall under, but it would have to be related to a development regulation you have in place currently, not the caveat of impacts to be generally created by that use. Again, that language was specific to just conditional zoning.
Yeah, well, I'm
I'm not sure what our ordinance says about that matter, but I think it's fair to say that state law allows that, for example, in the case of a major subdivision, if the traffic impacts, if it can be substantiated that the traffic impacts require improvements to transportation infrastructure, then we can require the developer to fund those improvements.
Okay, well, I'm just thinking generally, with development the way it is and our roads the way they are, if you start stacking development up along some of our roads that are already in trouble, it's not going to get any better. And
Well, yeah.
so somebody's got to, it seems like somebody's got to have the ability to say, wait a minute, this is going to get worse, and something's got to be done.
Right. The problem there, though, is that in the overwhelming majority of cases, what you're going to find is that the actual engineering analysis will demonstrate that while the perception is that this development is going to have this huge traffic impact,
Okay.
it really isn't as big. It really isn't going to be big enough to substantiate any type of demand by local government for the developer to fund
Okay.
transportation infrastructure improvements.
Okay.
I'd also like to add on to that, some of the things that Lydia is getting at, our subdivision review process is an administrative review process. Meaning if you meet the standards that are laid out in our ordinance, you're pretty much obliged to approve that subdivision. What you were talking about was some of that language on impacts and so on. So you're looking at, that's almost a quasi judicial type of review process where you look at those type of impacts. Our process is not a quasi judicial process, similar to like Southern Pines has. Ours is really an administrative review process for major subdivisions.
Which creates problems when you're having a public hearing where it would appear that you're asking for broad public comment on the proposal, where really, with our current process, you're really stuck in a box. I mean, our
It's a
major
perception
subdivision
problem.
review our major subdivision review is no different than someone dropping off a fence application for me to review and approve. If it meets all those
Okay.
standards, then I have to give them the permit.
Okay. Okay.
You'll see a lot of folks that do require a special use permit for a subdivision that's creating XYZ number of lots or greater, or they'll have that subjective criteria that it shall not have a negative impact on traffic in the area. So then the burden of proof, if you have these quasi judicial procedures, is, well, an applicant's going to have to bring in someone to provide some sort of expert testimony to try to satisfy to the group that they meet that burden. And then anyone else who would want to object would, have to also be subject to those same standards.
I don't know if it's going to be helpful or not, but I think that, when you think about the transportation impacts and concerns that the community has and stuff, you could look at it from a standpoint and make a very firm case that if an applicant is coming and wishes to develop property in accordance with the zoning, then the transportation network that we have should support the zoning that we approved. It's in our plan, right? We zoned it that way. So it's on us. So if an applicant wants to use property in compliance with the zoning that we approve, then if there's a transportation traffic problem, then it's our problem to solve. It's not his.
Our development regulations need to be reflective of what we need to have developers meet.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've got some two-lane roads that run from here into other jurisdictions, and then you get development that's packed in along that two-lane road that goes through several jurisdictions, and so we all become affected. The impacts can be pretty significant along our two-lane roads that flow through several jurisdictions where development is allowed to pile up.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand, generally the public is not generally the public's concerned about transportation. There's some significant concerns about transportation. And then I just, wonder what can we do to take a broad look at it, and maybe, what control do we have over development in Pinehurst? That, yeah, we approved the zoning a long time ago, but the road that goes into there has been so heavily developed that anybody who lives along those two-lane roads is being impacted. And I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah. I think it goes back to if the development is in compliance with the zoning, then if there's a transportation problem, it's our problem. It's not the developer's problem.
Whew.
We approved the zoning.
I don't disagree with you, Jeff. My question in my mind, and how do any of us sitting here know, whether at the time these initial zones and use densities were laid out across town, did anybody even add them up in their mind and say, gee whiz, we got enough roads to handle it? Not to mention what adjoining municipalities are doing on roads that traverse, as Lydia was saying. So they may very well not be adequate, the roads, to handle the potential zoning that could go in if everybody built everything out.
True that.
Yep.
All roads lead to transportation.
With the conversation we had a little while ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there other
My-
questions?
My question's done.
I'm sorry, who was speaking? Jane? Lydia?
Oh, no, I said, my question is, I'm through with my question.
Okay. Other questions for Alex or Darren?
Thank you.
There will, I mean, we'll be getting into this more, I'm sure, but this is helpful, and if we can get that deck around, that'd be great.
Thanks, Alex.
All right, so we'll let them go?
Alex?
All right. That'll end the training session. And the next point on the agenda is to move from the work session to the closed session. Anybody disagree with that? And so we'll need a motion to move to a closed session from the work session. I believe you have that.
I move to
I'll do
recess.
that.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I move to recess the work session and enter into a closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 1, Section 143-318, dot 11, paren A, paren 3, to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the public body in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the public body, which privilege is hereby acknowledged.
There's a motion to move into a closed session from the work session by Lydia Bosch. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
There's a second by Jane Hogeman. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. We'll move into the closed session. We'll just take a couple of quick minutes here for staff to
Is
set everything
Darren
up.
still around?